When Silas Granger found the woman collapsed in the tall grass under the merciless Arizona sun, he didn't know her name, but he recognized the terror in her eyes. Terror that came from a man, not a beast. Terror that made her flinch from kindness like it was another kind of weapon. By the time she whispered the name Hollis Braddock, Silas knew three things. She was running from a monster wearing a respectable face. That monster would come for her with the law in his pocket, and Silas Granger had just declared a war he couldn't afford to lose. If you're watching from somewhere in this wide world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far Nora's story travels. And if you stay until the end, you'll see why sometimes the bravest thing a woman can do is say one single word: no. Hit that like button, and let's begin. The heat came up from the ground in waves thick enough to choke on. Silas Granger rode the fence line the way he did every Tuesday morning, slow, methodical, checking posts his grandfather had sunk into this Arizona earth before Silas was born. The wood remembered those hands better than Silas did. His grandfather had been dead 20 years, but the ranch still held his shape in the placement of every gate, every water trough, every deliberate choice that kept cattle alive in country that wanted everything dead. Silas wasn't a romantic about it. This land didn't care about legacy or blood. It would take the ranch back the moment he stopped paying attention. That was the bargain, and he'd made peace with it the same way he'd made peace with most things, by not expecting softness where there wasn't any. The sky stretched pale and vicious overhead. No clouds, no mercy, just that bone-white heat pressing down on everything that dared to grow. He almost missed her. A scatter of crows lifted from the grass, maybe 60 yards out, their wings black against all that white-hot nothing. Crows didn't spook easy in summer. They were too mean, too patient. If they were moving, something bigger had disturbed them first. Silas reined his mare to a halt and stood in the stirrups, squinting past the sage and buffalo grass toward the place the birds had been. For a long moment, he saw nothing. Then, movement. Small. Wrong. Not cattle. He nudged the mare forward, slow and quiet, the way you approach anything unknown in open country. The grass whispered against her legs. The leather of his saddle creaked in the stillness. Then he saw the fabric. A dress. Pale blue, torn at the shoulder. It took his brain a moment to make sense of the rest. The way the fabric pooled around a shape that shouldn't be lying in the dirt. The dark smudge of blood on sun-bleached cotton. The trembling. A woman. Silas dismounted fast, boots hitting the ground hard. He didn't run. Running scared animals worse. But he closed the distance quick, already pulling his coat off his shoulders even though the temperature was pushing 100 degrees. She was on her side, curled tight, arms wrapped around her ribs. Her hair had come loose from whatever pins had held it, tangled with dust and dried grass. He could see bruises blooming purple along her collarbone, disappearing under the torn neckline of her dress. Her hands were scraped raw, nails broken. "Ma'am?" His voice came out rougher than he meant. He cleared his throat, crouched low to the ground, but kept his distance. 6 feet at least, close enough to be heard, far enough not to crowd. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" She flinched so hard she nearly folded in half. Silas froze. He'd seen that kind of flinch before. It wasn't surprise. It was reflex. The kind that came from expecting a blow and knowing it would land whether you were ready or not. He set his coat down in the grass between them and stayed crouched, balanced on the balls of his feet, hands visible, empty, resting on his thighs. "I'm not going to touch you," he said, quieter this time. "I'm going to stay right here until you're ready to talk. That's all." Her breathing was shallow, rapid, like she'd been running for miles. Maybe she had. Her dress was shredded at the hem, feet bare and bleeding. No horse, no supplies. Just her, collapsed in the middle of his land like something discarded. The sun beat down. Flies circled, drawn by the smell of blood. Silas waited. It took a long time, maybe 5 minutes, maybe 10, before her breathing slowed enough for her to speak. When she did, her voice was barely a whisper, scraped raw. "Don't." "I won't," Silas said. "I promise." Her eyes opened. They were the color of winter sky, pale gray, sharp with pain. She looked at him the way a trapped animal looks at the thing holding the snare. Not pleading, not hopeful, just calculating the cost of what came next. "You're on my land," Silas said. keeping his tone level, factual. You're hurt. I'd like to help, but I won't do a damn thing you don't want me to do. You understand? She stared at him. Her lips were cracked, bleeding at the corner. She'd bitten through the skin. Water, she whispered. Silas nodded once, rose slowly to his feet, and walked back to his mare. He pulled the canteen from his saddle, uncapped it, and returned to the same spot he'd been before. He set the canteen on the ground between them, next to the coat. It's clean, he said. Take what you need. She didn't move right away. Her eyes tracked his every motion, cataloging exits, measuring threats. Finally, she uncurled just enough to reach for the canteen. Her hands shook so hard the first time she tried to drink, water spilled down her chin. She gasped, tried again, managed 3 long swallows before lowering it. Thank you, she said. Silas nodded. Can you stand? I don't know. That's all right. We'll figure it out. He gestured to the coat. That's for you, if you want it. Sun's only getting hotter. She looked at the coat like it might bite her. Then, moving with the careful deliberation of someone testing broken bones, she reached for it and pulled it across her shoulders. It swallowed her. She was small, barely 5'3" if that, and the coat hung past her knees. There's a ranch house about a mile north, Silas said. You can rest there. Clean up if you want. I've got bandages, food, a bed. You don't have to tell me anything you don't want to tell me. You don't have to stay, but you can. Her eyes filled. She blinked hard, forcing the tears back. Why? The word came out sharp, suspicious. Silas met her gaze steady. Because nobody should be out here alone like this. You don't know me. Don't need to. She studied him for a long time. He didn't look away, didn't soften the truth of what he was offering. This wasn't charity. This was just the only decent choice in a situation that didn't have many. Finally, she whispered, I can't walk. That's all right, Silas said. I'll bring the horse closer. You tell me if you can pull yourself up into the saddle, and I'll walk her slow. If you can't, I'll rig a travois and drag you gentle as I can. Either way, we'll get you there. You won't? She stopped, swallowed. You won't touch me? Not unless you ask me to. She closed her eyes. Her whole body was trembling now, not just her hands. Shock, probably. Blood loss, heat, all of it piling on at once. Okay, she whispered. Silas stood, walked to his mare, and led her over by the reins. The horse was old, steady, trained for this country's cruelties. She didn't spook at the smell of blood. Her name's Dusty, Silas said. She won't move unless I tell her to. The woman looked up at the saddle like it was a mountain. Then, gritting her teeth, she braced one hand against the ground and tried to push herself upright. She made it halfway before her strength gave out. She collapsed back into the dirt, gasping. Easy, Silas said. We've got time. I can do it? I believe you, but you don't have to do it all at once. She glared at him through tangled hair. There was fury in that look, bright and bitter. Not at him, at herself, at whatever had brought her here. I'm not weak, she said. Never said you were. She tried again. This time she got her feet under her, knees shaking, one hand braced against Dusty's flank. The mare stood solid as stone. The woman hauled herself up, inch by inch, until she was standing, barely, holding onto the saddle like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Silas kept his hands at his sides. Can you swing your leg over? She nodded, jaw clenched. It took her 3 tries. On the third, she made it, collapsing forward against Dusty's neck with a sound that was half sob, half gasp. Blood soaked through the saddle blanket where her knees pressed down. You all right? Silas asked. No. Her voice was muffled against the horse's mane. But I'm up. That's enough. He took Dusty's reins and started walking north, slow and steady. The woman didn't sit up. She stayed bent low, arms wrapped around the mare's neck, breathing hard. Silas didn't push her to talk. The silence was heavy, but it wasn't unkind. The ranch house came into view after 20 minutes, low-slung adobe and weathered wood, built into the landscape like it had grown there. A windmill turned lazy circles beside the barn. Chickens scratched in the dust. It wasn't much, but it was solid. Silas led Dusty right up to the porch steps and stopped. This is it, he said. The woman lifted her head, looked at the house like she was seeing a mirage. "You live here alone?" she asked. "Yeah." She hesitated. "No wife?" "No." "No one else?" "Just me." She seemed to be weighing that information, deciding whether it made her safer or more vulnerable. Finally, she nodded. "I need to get down. Can you, or do you need help?" "I can try." She swung her leg back over, moving stiff and slow, and slid down from the saddle. Her legs buckled the second her feet hit the ground. Silas moved without thinking, catching her elbow to steady her, and she screamed. It wasn't loud. It was worse than loud. It was raw and wrenching, a sound dragged up from some dark place inside her. Silas let go instantly, hands up, stepping back. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have..." She was shaking so hard her teeth rattled. She backed away from him, stumbling, nearly falling again. Her eyes were wild. "Don't!" she gasped. "Don't, please." "I won't. I'm not going to." Silas kept his hands raised, his voice low and even. "You're safe. I swear to you, you're safe." She stared at him, chest heaving, and slowly, so slowly, the panic receded. Not gone, just buried again. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "You don't have anything to be sorry for." She wiped her face with the back of her hand, smearing dust and tears. "I need to sit down. Porch is right there. Take your time." She made it to the steps and sank down onto the bottom one, elbows on her knees, head in her hands. Silas tied Dusty to the rail and stood a respectful distance away, giving her space to breathe. After a while, she looked up. "Do you have bandages?" she asked. "Inside. I'll bring them out." "And water to clean with?" "Yeah, I'll get it." He disappeared into the house and came back a minute later with a basin of clean water, a cloth, a tin of salve, and strips of linen. He set everything on the porch beside her and stepped back. "You want me to leave you alone while you do it?" he asked. She looked at the supplies, then at her hands, torn up, filthy, still shaking. "No," she said quietly. "Stay. Just don't touch me." "I won't." Silas sat down on the edge of the porch a few feet away and watched as she dipped the cloth into the water and began cleaning the worst of the dirt from her palms. She worked methodically, wincing every time the fabric dragged across raw skin. Blood welled up fresh in places. She didn't stop. "You want to tell me your name?" Silas asked after a while. She paused, cloth hovering over her wrist. "Nora," she said. "Nora Pierce." "Nora," Silas nodded. "I'm Silas Granger. This is my land. You're welcome to stay as long as you need." She looked at him, something unreadable flickering across her face. "Why are you being kind to me?" "Because you need it." "You don't know what I've done." "Don't care." "You should." Silas leaned back on his hands, eyes steady on hers. "Nora, I found you bleeding in the dirt, alone, terrified. Whatever you did or didn't do, it doesn't change the fact that you're hurt and you need help. That's all I need to know." Her eyes filled again. This time, the tears spilled over. "I ran," she whispered. "I ran, and he's going to find me." Silas's jaw tightened. "Who?" She wiped her face, shaking her head. "It doesn't matter." "It does if he's coming after you." "He will. He always does." "Then we'll deal with it when he gets here." Nora let out a bitter, broken laugh. "You don't understand. He's respected. People listen to him. People believe him." "Not out here, they don't. You don't know him." "Maybe not, but I know men like him." Silas's voice went flat, cold. "And I know they bleed the same as anyone else." Nora stared at him. For the first time since he'd found her, something other than fear flickered in her eyes. Hope, maybe, or just the faint, desperate possibility of it. "What's his name?" Silas asked. She hesitated. Then so quietly he almost missed it, she said, "Hollis Braddock." Silas went very still. He knew that name. Everyone in this part of Arizona knew that name. Hollis Braddock owned half of Prescott, had his fingers in every bank, every mine, every piece of land worth owning. He was a deacon at the church, a regular at the mayor's table, a man whose word carried weight, and now Silas knew what kind of man he really was. "All right," Silas said, his voice quiet and final. Then we'd better be ready. Nora looked at him like he'd just said something impossible. You can't fight him, she said. He'll destroy you. Maybe, but I'm not letting him take you. Why? Her voice cracked. Why would you do this? Silas met her gaze, unflinching. Because somebody has to. Chuz. Nora slept on the porch that first night. Silas had offered her the bedroom, his bedroom, the only real bed in the house, but she'd refused. Too enclosed, she said. Too many walls. So he'd brought out blankets and a pillow, set them on the porch boards, and told her he'd be inside if she needed anything. She didn't sleep much. He could hear her shifting, restless, through the open window. Every creak of the wood made her breath hitch. Every distant sound, coyotes, wind, the settling of the house, pulled her tighter into herself. Silas lay awake on the floor inside, staring at the ceiling, and thought about Hollis Braddock. He'd met the man once, years ago, at a cattle auction in Prescott. Hollis had been smooth, polished, the kind of man who smiled when he shook your hand and made you feel like you'd just been blessed. Silas had walked away from that handshake feeling like he needed to wash. Now he understood why. When dawn broke, Silas found Nora sitting on the porch steps, wrapped in a blanket, watching the sun rise over the plains. Her face was pale, bruises darker in the morning light. She looked like she hadn't slept at all. Morning, Silas said from the doorway. She didn't turn. Morning. You hungry? Not really. You should eat anyway. She sighed, pulled the blanket tighter. I know. Silas went inside and made breakfast, eggs, bacon, bread toasted over the stove. Simple, solid food. When he brought it out, she took the plate without argument and ate slowly, mechanically, like her body was doing it without her permission. I need to go into town today, Silas said, leaning against the porch rail. Get supplies. Check in with a few people. Nora's head snapped up. No. I won't mention you. I just need to... No. Her voice was sharp, desperate. If you go into town, someone will see you. Someone will ask questions. And if Hollis hears you've been asking around, he'll know I'm here. Nora, he's going to figure it out eventually. Not yet, please. Not yet. Silas studied her. The fear in her eyes was real, bone deep. She wasn't being paranoid. She was being smart. All right, he said. I'll wait. She sagged with relief. Thank you. But we need a plan. If he comes looking, he will. Then we need to be ready. Nora set the plate down, hands trembling. You don't understand. Hollis doesn't just come. He brings people, witnesses. He makes it look legal, proper. He'll have a sheriff, a deputy, maybe a judge. He'll say I'm his fiancée, that I ran away in a fit of hysteria, that I need to be brought home for my own safety. Silas's jaw clenched. And people believe that? Every time. How many times has he done this? Nora's face went blank, shuddered. Enough! Silas pushed off the rail, paced to the edge of the porch. His mind was already working through possibilities, strategies. Hollis might have money and influence, but out here, on Silas's land, those things mattered less. Out here, the only law that counted was the one you could enforce yourself. Do you have family? Silas asked. Anyone who'd vouch for you? Nora shook her head. My parents died when I was 16. I've been alone since then. No friends? No one who'd stand up for you? Hollis made sure of that. Her voice was bitter. He's very good at isolating people. Silas turned back to her. What about proof? Anything that shows what he's done? Like what? A signed confession? Nora laughed, hollow and sharp. Men like Hollis don't leave proof. They leave fear. Silas crouched down in front of her, far enough away not to crowd, close enough to be heard. Nora, I believe you. I want you to know that. I don't need proof to believe you. But if we're going to stop him, we need something more than just your word against his. There is no more than. It's always been my word against his, and my word has never been enough. Then we'll make it enough. She looked at him, eyes red-rimmed and exhausted. How? I don't know yet, but I know a man who might. Who? Silas hesitated. He hadn't spoken to Ezra Kincaid in 5 years, hadn't wanted to. The last time they'd crossed paths, Ezra had been bleeding out in a gulch with a bullet in his gut, and Silas had been the one to pull him out. Ezra had said he owed Silas his life. Silas had told him to forget it, but now he needed that debt. His name's Ezra Kincaid, Silas said. He's a federal marshal. Works out of Tucson, but he's got jurisdiction all over the territory. If anyone can stand up to Hollis Braddock, it's him. Nora's expression flickered, something like hope, buried under layers of disbelief. And you think he'll help? I think he owes me. That's not the same as helping. It is with Ezra. Nora pulled the blanket tighter, staring out at the empty plains. If you send for him, Hollis will know. Word spreads fast. Then I'll be careful. Careful isn't enough. Hollis has people everywhere. In the telegraph office, the post office, the saloons. He hears everything. Silas nodded slowly. Then I won't send a telegram. I'll ride to Tucson myself. That's 3 days there and 3 days back. I know. You'd leave me here alone? No. Silas stood, crossed his arms. You'd come with me. Nora stared at him like he'd lost his mind. I can't go back to town. I can't. We won't go through Prescott. We'll take the southern route, stay clear of anywhere Hollis has eyes. It'll take longer, but it's safer. Safer? Nora's voice rose, sharp with panic. There's no safer. There's only hiding and hoping he doesn't find me before I die. Silas crouched down again, meeting her eyes. Nora, you can hide out here as long as you need. I meant what I said. You're safe on my land. But hiding isn't the same as being free. And if Hollis is half the man you say he is, he won't stop looking, not ever. So we can sit here and wait for him to come, or we can take the fight to him first. Nora's hands were shaking again. She pressed them flat against her knees, trying to still them. I'm so tired, she whispered. I'm so tired of running. Then don't run. Stand. She looked at him, and for the first time, something in her face shifted. The fear was still there. It would always be there. But beneath it, buried deep, was something harder. Anger, defiance, the part of her that had survived this long. If I do this, she said slowly, if I go with you, what happens when Hollis finds out? Then he finds out. He'll come for me. Let him. He'll bring the law. Then we'll bring a better one. Nora closed her eyes, exhaled slowly. When she opened them again, they were clear, decided. All right, she said, let's go. They left at dawn 2 days later. Silas spent the time preparing, packing supplies, checking the mare's shoes, loading his rifle. Nora spent it healing, or trying to. The bruises were fading from purple to yellow-green. The cuts on her hands were scabbing over. But the fear in her eyes hadn't lessened. If anything, it had sharpened. She didn't talk much. Silas didn't push. He just kept showing up, bringing her food, checking if she needed anything, staying close enough to help but far enough not to smother. Slowly, incrementally, she started to relax. Not fully, not anywhere close, but enough to sit on the porch without jumping at every sound, enough to meet his eyes when he spoke. On the morning they left, she came out of the house wearing a clean dress Silas had found in an old trunk, his mother's from years ago. It was too big in the shoulders, too long in the hem, but it fit better than the torn, blood-stained thing she'd arrived in. You ready? Silas asked. Nora nodded. As I'll ever be. They rode south, away from Prescott, into country that was emptier and harder. The heat pressed down like a hand. Dust rose in pale clouds behind Dusty's hooves. They passed through stretches of land where nothing grew but scrub and stone, where the only sound was wind and the creak of leather. Nora rode behind Silas, arms wrapped tight around his waist, head pressed against his back. She didn't speak, didn't ask where they were going or how much farther. She just held on. Silas felt the tension in her grip, the way she flinched every time a shadow moved, every time the wind shifted. He kept Dusty's pace steady, calm, predictable. No sudden movements, no surprises. On the second day, they stopped at a creek to water the horse and rest. Nora slid down from the saddle and walked to the water's edge, kneeling to splash her face. Silas stayed by the mare, giving her space. After a while, Nora spoke. Why are you doing this? Silas looked up. I told you. No. She turned to face him. I mean, really, why risk everything for someone you don't know? Silas considered the question. He could give her the easy answer, because it was right, because no one deserved what she'd been through. But that wasn't the whole truth. 5 years ago, he said slowly, I found a man dying in a gulch not far from here. He'd been shot, left for dead. I didn't know him, didn't owe him anything, but I pulled him out anyway, patched him up, kept him alive until help came. The marshal, Nora said. Yeah, Ezra Kincaid. Silas leaned against the mare, arms crossed. He asked me why I did it. I told him the same thing I'm telling you, because somebody had to. Nora stared at him. That's it? That's the whole reason? That's the whole reason. She shook her head, almost smiling. You're either the best man I've ever met, or the stupidest. Probably both. This time she did smile. It was small, fleeting, but it was real. They reached Tucson on the third day, just as the sun was setting. The town sprawled low and dusty against the horizon, adobe buildings glowing gold in the fading light. Silas led them to a boarding house on the edge of town, paid for 2 rooms, and told Nora to lock her door. I'll be back in an hour, he said. Where are you going? To find Ezra. Nora's face went pale. What if he's not here? Then I'll find him wherever he is. And if you can't? Silas met her eyes, steady and sure. I will. He found Ezra Kincaid in a saloon 3 blocks south, sitting at a corner table with a glass of whiskey and a tired expression. Ezra looked older than Silas remembered, more gray in his hair, more lines around his eyes. But when he saw Silas walk through the door, his face lit up. Silas Granger? Ezra stood grinning. I'll be damned. Ezra! They shook hands and Ezra gestured to the empty chair. Sit. Drink. Tell me what brings you all the way to Tucson. Silas sat, but he didn't drink. He just looked at Ezra and said, I need your help. Ezra's grin faded. He set his glass down, leaned back in his chair. What kind of help? The kind that might get you killed? Ezra studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded. All right, talk. Silas told him everything about finding Nora, about Hollis Braddock, about the way the law bent to money and power in Prescott. He kept his voice low, factual, but the anger beneath it was unmistakable. When he finished, Ezra was quiet. He turned his glass in slow circles on the table, thinking. Hollis Braddock, he said finally. I've heard the name. Clean reputation, lot of friends in high places. He's a monster. I believe you, but believing you and proving it are 2 different things. I know, that's why I need you. Ezra looked at him. You're asking me to go up against a man with money, influence, and half the territory in his pocket, based on the word of a woman I've never met. Yeah. And you think that's going to work? I think you owe me. Ezra's jaw tightened. He didn't argue. He couldn't. They both knew the truth of it. All right, Ezra said quietly. I'll help. But I need to talk to her first. Hear her story myself. She's at the boarding house, room 7. Ezra stood, tossed a coin on the table. Let's go. They walked back through the darkening streets. Silas silent, Ezra thoughtful. When they reached the boarding house, Silas knocked on Nora's door. It's me, he said. I've got someone who wants to meet you. The door opened a crack. Nora's face appeared, pale and wary. This is Marshal Ezra Kincaid, Silas said. He's going to help. Nora looked at Ezra, then at Silas. Slowly she opened the door wider. Come in. They sat in the small room, Nora on the bed, Silas and Ezra in the 2 chairs. Ezra asked questions, gentle but direct. Nora answered them, her voice steady even when the words weren't. She told him about Hollis, how he'd courted her after her parents died, how he'd seemed kind at first, how the kindness had curdled into control. She told him about the locked doors, the accusations, the way he'd twist her words until she doubted her own memory. She told him about the night she'd run, the way he'd smiled when she'd tried to leave, the way his hands had. She stopped, couldn't finish. Ezra didn't push, he just nodded, wrote a few notes, and closed his book. I believe you, he said. Nora blinked. Just like that? Just like that. But you don't have proof. Not yet. But I will. Ezra stood, looked at Silas. Give me 3 days. I'll dig into Hollis's business, see what I can find. In the meantime, you two stay here. Don't go anywhere public. Don't talk to anyone you don't trust. And then? Silas asked. Ezra's expression hardened. Then we go to Prescott, and we end this. Ezra Kincaid kept his word. 3 days later, he walked into the boarding house with a leather satchel under his arm and an expression that told Silas everything had changed. Not better, just different. The kind of different that came with evidence and consequences. Nora was sitting by the window when Ezra knocked, her hands folded in her lap, staring out at the street like she expected to see Hollis Braddock materialize from the dust. She'd barely left the room in 72 hours. Barely eaten. Sleep came in fragments, broken by dreams that left her gasping. Silas had stayed close, taking the room next door, checking on her every few hours. He didn't crowd her, didn't ask questions she wasn't ready to answer. He just showed up, steady and quiet, until his presence became something she could predict. Something safe. When Ezra entered, Nora stood, her spine straight, her face composed. But Silas could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers gripped the back of the chair. Miss Pierce, Ezra said, nodding respectfully, thank you for waiting. Did you find something? Her voice was calm, but there was an edge underneath, hope and fear braided so tight they couldn't be separated. Ezra set the satchel on the table and pulled out a stack of papers. I found a lot of things. Some of them are going to be hard to hear. Nora's jaw tightened. I've heard hard things before. I know, but this is different. Ezra gestured to the papers. Hollis Braddock is a careful man. He doesn't leave much behind, but careful isn't the same as clean. Silas leaned forward. What did you find? Ezra spread the documents across the table, property deeds, bank records, witness statements collected quietly from people who owed Ezra favors. Hollis owns half of Prescott, like you said. Mines, saloons, land. But the interesting part is how he got it. 3 different properties transferred to him in the last 5 years under suspicious circumstances. Each time, the previous owner was a woman. Each time, the transfer happened after an engagement was announced. And each time, the woman disappeared within 6 months. Nora went very still. Disappeared, she repeated, her voice hollow. You mean, no one knows where they are. No death certificates, no forwarding addresses, no family who'll talk about them. Just gone. Silas felt something cold settle in his chest. How many? 3 that I can prove. Maybe more. Ezra looked at Nora. You would have been the 4th. Nora sank into the chair, her face drained of color. I knew he was dangerous. I knew he'd hurt people, but I didn't think... She stopped, pressed her hands to her mouth. I thought I was the only one. You're not, Ezra said gently, and that's going to help us. How? Nora's voice cracked. Those women are gone. They can't testify. No, but the pattern can. Ezra tapped the papers. A man doesn't accidentally acquire property from 3 different fiancés who all vanish without a trace. That's not coincidence. That's method. Silas crossed his arms. Will a judge see it that way? Depends on the judge, which is why we're not going to Prescott first. Where are we going? Yuma. There's a territorial judge there, Marcus Holt. He's old school, doesn't take bribes, doesn't care how much money you have. If we can get him to issue a warrant, Hollis won't be able to hide behind his reputation. Nora shook her head. Hollis has friends everywhere. Even if this judge issues a warrant, someone will warn him. He'll disappear before you can arrest him. Not if we move fast. Ezra leaned against the table, his tone shifting from gentle to tactical. Here's what's going to happen. I ride to Yuma tomorrow, present the evidence to Judge Holt, and get a federal warrant. Meanwhile, you two go back to Silas's ranch and wait. Don't go into Prescott, don't let anyone see you. When I've got the warrant, I'll come to you, and we'll bring Hollis in together. Together? Nora's eyes widened. You want me to go with you? I need you to go with me. Your testimony is the only thing that ties this all together. The other women can't speak, but you can. Nora stood abruptly, pacing to the window. If I go back to Prescott, If I stand in front of him and accuse him, he'll try to destroy you, Ezra said bluntly. He'll call you a liar, a hysteric, whatever he thinks will stick. But he won't be able to touch you, not with me standing there, not with a federal warrant in my hand. You don't know him. No, but I know men like him, and I know how they fall apart when someone finally stands up to them. Nora turned, her eyes wet but fierce. What if no one believes me? Then we make them believe you. Ezra's voice was steady, certain. Miss Pierce, I've been doing this job for 15 years. I've seen guilty men walk free because no one was willing to fight for the truth. I'm not letting that happen here. Not to you. Silas watched Nora's face, saw the war happening inside her, the part that wanted to run, to hide, to disappear into the desert and never look back, fighting against the part that was so damn tired of being afraid. Finally, she nodded. All right, I'll do it. Ezra smiled, the first real warmth Silas had seen from him in days. Good. Then let's get to work. The ride back to Silas's ranch felt longer than the ride out. Maybe it was the weight of what they were carrying now, not just fear but purpose. Not just survival but the possibility of something more. Justice, maybe. Or at least accountability. Nora was quieter than before, but it was a different kind of quiet. Not hollow, not broken. Just focused. Like she was gathering herself for what came next. They stopped to rest at midday, finding shade under a scraggly cottonwood near a dried-up creek bed. Silas unsaddled Dusty and let her graze while Nora sat on a flat rock staring at the horizon. You all right? Silas asked, sitting down a few feet away. Nora glanced at him. I don't know. Ask me after this is over. Fair enough. She picked up a stone, turned it over in her palm. Do you think it'll work? Ezra's plan? I think Ezra's good at what he does. That's not an answer. Silas sighed, leaned back on his hands. Nora, I can't promise you this is going to go the way we want. Hollis has power, and power's a hard thing to break, but I can promise you won't face him alone. Whatever happens, I'll be there. Why? The question came out raw, frustrated. Why do you keep doing this? You don't owe me anything. I know. Then why? Silas looked at her, really looked at her. The bruises on her face were fading, but the ones inside ran deeper. She'd been beaten down so many times, told she was worthless so many times, that she couldn't fathom someone helping her without wanting something in return. Because you deserve better than what he did to you, Silas said quietly. And because if I don't stand up for you, who will? Nora's eyes filled. She looked away quickly, blinking hard. I'm not worth this. Yes, you are. You don't know me. I know enough. She laughed bitterly. You know I ran away from a man who said he loved me. You know I'm a coward. Running from someone who's hurting you isn't cowardice, it's survival. It doesn't feel like survival. It feels like I'm always one step away from being dragged back. Silas leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Then we make sure he can't drag you back. We do this right, Nora. We go to Prescott, we tell the truth, and we don't back down. You hear me? She met his eyes, and for the first time, something in her face softened. Not surrender, not resignation, trust. I hear you, she said. They rode the rest of the way in silence, but it was a companionable silence now, the kind that didn't need filling. When the ranch came into view, Nora let out a breath she'd been holding for hours. The house looked the same, low, weathered, solid. But this time, it didn't feel like a hiding place. It felt like a stronghold. Silas helped her down from the saddle, careful not to touch her unless she asked, and led Dusty to the barn. Nora stood in the yard, looking around like she was seeing it all for the first time. It's quiet here, she said. Too quiet? No. She smiled faintly. Just right. Ezra returned 4 days later, riding hard, his horse lathered and blowing. He dismounted in front of the house and pulled a folded piece of paper from his coat. Got it, he said, handing it to Silas. Silas unfolded the warrant. It was signed by Judge Marcus Holt, authorizing the arrest of Hollis Braddock on charges of fraud, coercion, and suspicion of foul play in the disappearances of 3 women. It wasn't murder, not yet, but it was enough to bring him in. "When do we leave?" Silas asked. "Tomorrow, early." Ezra looked at Nora, who'd stepped out onto the porch. "You ready?" Nora nodded. "As I'll ever be." "Good. Because once we start this, there's no stopping. Hollis is going to fight, and he's going to fight dirty. You need to be prepared for that." "I know." Ezra's expression softened. "Miss Pierce, I need you to understand something. When we get to Prescott, you're going to see people you thought were friends. People who will look at you like you're the villain in this story. Hollis is good at making himself the victim. He's going to say you stole from him, that you're lying, that you're unstable. And some people are going to believe him." Nora's hands clenched into fists. "Let them. You say that now? I mean it." Her voice was hard, final. "I've spent years being afraid of what people think. I'm done. If they want to believe Hollis, that's their choice. But I'm not going to let him win because I'm too scared to speak." Ezra smiled. "Then we're going to get along just fine." That night, Silas found Nora sitting on the porch steps, staring at the stars. He sat down beside her, leaving space between them. "You should try to sleep," he said. "I can't." "Nervous?" "Terrified." Silas nodded. "That's normal." "Is it?" She glanced at him. "You don't seem scared." "I am, just good at hiding it." Nora smiled faintly. "What are you scared of?" Silas thought about it. "That we'll get there, and it won't be enough. That Hollis will walk away, and you'll have gone through all this for nothing. And if that happens, then we find another way." Nora looked at him, searching his face. "You really believe that, don't you? That there's always another way?" "I have to." She was quiet for a moment, then slowly she reached out and placed her hand on top of his. It was the first time she'd touched him willingly since he'd found her in the grass. Her hand was small, cold, trembling slightly. Silas didn't move, didn't pull away, didn't squeeze back. Just let her hand rest there, light and tentative. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For not giving up on me." Silas turned his hand over, palm up, and let her decide. After a long moment, she laced her fingers through his. "I'm not giving up," he said quietly. "Not now. Not ever." Potent. They rode into Prescott at noon the next day, when the streets were crowded and the sun was high. Ezra wanted witnesses, wanted people to see them coming, see him wearing his marshal's badge, see Nora riding beside them with her head held high. The town was exactly as Nora had described it, prosperous, orderly, clean. The kind of place where everything looked perfect on the surface and rot festered underneath. People stared as they passed. Women whispered behind their hands. Men's eyes lingered on Nora, calculating, judging. She kept her gaze straight ahead, her jaw set, her hands steady on the reins. Ezra led them straight to the sheriff's office. A broad-shouldered man with a mustache and a star on his chest stepped out, squinting at them. "Help you?" he asked, his tone wary. Ezra dismounted, pulled out his badge. "Marshal Ezra Kincaid. I'm here on federal business." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "What kind of business?" "The kind that involves a warrant." Ezra handed him the paper. "I'm looking for Hollis Braddock." The sheriff read the warrant, his face going tight. "This is a mistake." "No mistake. Where is he?" "Hollis is a respected man in this town. Whatever this woman told you, I'm not interested in your opinion, Sheriff. I'm interested in Hollis Braddock's location." The sheriff glanced at Nora, his lip curling. "So she's the one spreading lies." Nora flinched, but she didn't look away. Ezra stepped between them, his voice dropping to a dangerous calm. "You don't know what she's told me, Sheriff. And unless you want to be charged with obstruction, I suggest you answer my question." The sheriff's jaw worked. Finally, he said, "Hollis is at his office, 2 blocks east." "Thank you." Ezra took the warrant back and mounted his horse. "You're welcome to come along. Make sure everything stays legal." The sheriff hesitated, then grabbed his hat. "I'll come. But this better not turn into a circus." "That depends on Hollis." They rode through town with the sheriff trailing behind, drawing more stares, more whispers. By the time they reached Hollis's office, a clean, whitewashed building with his name painted in gold letters on the window, a small crowd had gathered. Ezra dismounted, walked to the door, and knocked. A moment later, the door opened. Hollis Braddock stood there, tall, handsome, impeccably dressed. His smile was warm, easy, the smile of a man who'd never been questioned in his life. "Marshal," Hollis said pleasantly, "to what do I owe the pleasure?" Ezra pulled out the warrant. "Hollis Braddock, you're under arrest for fraud, coercion, and suspicion of foul play in the disappearances of 3 women." Hollis's smile didn't falter. "I'm sorry, there must be some mistake." "No mistake. Marshal, I'm a businessman, a member of this community. I don't know what you've been told, but step outside, Mr. Braddock." Hollis's eyes flicked past Ezra to Nora, still mounted on her horse. Something cold and vicious flashed across his face, gone so fast most people would have missed it. But Nora saw it. She always saw it. "Nora," Hollis said, his voice dripping with concern. "Sweetheart, what have you done?" Nora's hands tightened on the reins. "I told the truth." "The truth?" Hollis laughed, soft and pitying. "Darling, you're confused. You've been under so much stress. Come home, and we'll sort this out." "I'm not going anywhere with you." "Nora, please, you're not well. You need help." Ezra stepped forward. "Mr. Braddock, you're going to come with me, or I'm going to arrest you right here in front of everyone. Your choice." Hollis looked at the crowd, at the sheriff, at Ezra. Then he smiled again, smooth and confident. "Of course, Marshal, I'm happy to cooperate, but I think you'll find this is all a terrible misunderstanding." "We'll see." Ezra cuffed Hollis's wrists, gently, professionally, and led him toward the horses. The crowd murmured, shocked. Hollis walked with his head high, his expression calm, like he was the one in control. But as he passed Nora, he leaned in and whispered, just loud enough for her to hear, "You'll regret this." Nora's breath caught, her vision blurred. For a moment, she was back in that house, locked in that room, hearing those same words over and over until she believed them. Then Silas's voice cut through the fog. "Nora." She looked at him. He was still mounted beside her, his eyes steady, his presence solid. "You're all right," he said quietly. "Stay with me." Nora nodded, forcing air into her lungs. "I'm here." "Good. Keep it that way." Ezra loaded Hollis into the sheriff's jail and posted a guard. Then he turned to the crowd, his voice carrying across the square. "Hollis Braddock is being held on federal charges. Anyone with information related to his business dealings or personal conduct is encouraged to come forward. This is a legal proceeding, and it will be conducted fairly." The crowd began to disperse, muttering, uncertain. Silas helped Nora down from her horse and led her to a bench outside the sheriff's office. She sat, her hands shaking, her face pale. "You did good," Silas said. "I didn't do anything. I just sat there." "You didn't run. That's something." Nora closed her eyes. "He's going to get out of this. You know that, right?" "He always does." "Not this time." "You don't know that." "No, but I believe it." Nora looked at him, exhausted and fragile. "I wish I had your faith." "You don't need faith. You just need to keep going." Before she could respond, a voice called out from across the street. "Nora Pierce!" They both turned. A man stood there, tall, clean-shaven, wearing a deputy's badge. His face was hard, his eyes cold. "Hank Coulter," Nora whispered. Silas stood, positioning himself between Nora and the deputy. "Something we can help you with?" Coulter's smile was thin, cruel. "Just wanted to see if the rumors were true. Heard you brought Miss Pierce back to town." "She came of her own free will." "Is that so?" Coulter looked past Silas to Nora. "Miss Pierce, Mr. Braddock is mighty worried about you. Says you've been saying some wild things." Nora stood, her voice shaking, but clear. "I've been telling the truth." "The truth?" Coulter chuckled. "Well, the truth's a funny thing, isn't it? Especially when it comes from a woman who ran off without a word, stole money, caused all kinds of trouble." "I didn't steal anything." "That's not what Hollis says." Ezra stepped out of the sheriff's office, his expression hard. "Deputy Coulter, unless you've got official business, I suggest you move along." Coulter's eyes flicked to Ezra's badge. "Federal marshal, huh? Lot of authority for a case based on one woman's word." It's based on evidence, and if you keep interfering, you'll be facing charges yourself. Coulter raised his hands in mock surrender. No interference here, Marshal. Just making sure everyone knows the kind of woman they're defending. He walked away, slow and deliberate, making sure everyone saw him leave on his own terms. Nora sank back onto the bench, her face in her hands. He's going to make this hell. Let him try, Ezra said. He's a local deputy with no jurisdiction over federal charges. He can posture all he wants, but he can't touch you. Silas crouched in front of Nora. Look at me. She lifted her head. We're not leaving you alone, not for a second. Coulter, Hollis, anyone else who wants to come at you, they'll have to go through us first, you understand? Nora nodded, her eyes wet. I understand. Good. Silas stood, looked at Ezra. What's next? Next, we wait for the hearing. Judge Holt will be here in 2 days. Until then, Hollis stays locked up and we keep Nora safe. Silas nodded. Then that's what we'll do. But as they walked away from the sheriff's office, Silas couldn't shake the feeling that the real fight hadn't started yet. Hollis might be in a cell, but his reach extended far beyond iron bars. And men like Hollis Braddock didn't go down without taking everyone they could with them. The boarding house Ezra found for them sat on the quiet end of Prescott's main street, far enough from the center of town to avoid prying eyes, but close enough that help could come quickly if needed. The proprietor was an older woman named Mrs. Caldwell, sharp-eyed and no-nonsense, who took one look at Nora's bruised face and asked no questions beyond whether they needed 2 rooms or 3. 3, Ezra said, paying in advance, and we'd appreciate discretion. Mrs. Caldwell pocketed the money and handed him the keys. I've been running this place for 30 years, Marshal. Discretion is what keeps me in business. Nora's room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out onto the street. She stood at that window now, watching the evening shadows stretch long across the dirt road, her arms wrapped tight around herself. Silas knocked softly on the door frame. The door was open, just like he'd promised it would always be. You should eat something, he said. Nora didn't turn. I'm not hungry. I know, but you should eat anyway. She sighed, finally looking at him. Does it ever stop? The feeling like something terrible is about to happen? Silas leaned against the doorframe, hands in his pockets. Eventually, but not today. That's not very comforting. Wasn't trying to be comforting, was trying to be honest. Nora almost smiled. You're terrible at this, you know. At what? Reassurance. Yeah, well, I'm better at other things. Like what? Like keeping my word. Nora's expression softened. She walked to the small table by the bed and sat down, her hands folded in her lap. Silas, what happens if the judge doesn't believe me? Then we find another way. There might not be another way. There's always another way. Might not be the way we want, but it's there. Nora shook her head slowly. You really believe that, don't you? That things can get better? I've seen worse things than this turnaround. Takes longer than you'd like, costs more than it should, but it happens. And if it doesn't? Silas pushed off the doorframe and walked to the chair across from her, sitting down so they were eye to eye. Then we deal with that when it comes. But right now, tonight, you're safe. You've got a locked door, a federal marshal outside, and me next door. Hollis is in a cell where he can't touch you. That's more than you had a week ago. Nora looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. You're right. It is. So eat something, get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be harder. She reached for the bread and cheese Mrs. Caldwell had left on a tray, breaking off a small piece. Will you stay? Just for a little while. Yeah, I'll stay. They sat in silence while Nora ate, the quiet, comfortable, and undemanding. Outside, the town settled into evening routines, shopkeepers closing up, families heading home, the saloon across the street beginning to fill with voices and piano music. It was strange, Nora thought, how normal everything looked when her whole world felt like it was balanced on a knife's edge. When she finished eating, Silas stood. I'll be right next door if you need anything. Door stays unlocked on my side. Thank you. He nodded and left, pulling her door mostly closed but leaving it cracked like he'd promised. Nora changed into the nightgown Mrs. Caldwell had provided, blew out the lamp, and lay down on the bed. Sleep felt impossible, but exhaustion had its own gravity. Eventually, it pulled her under. She dreamed of locked rooms and hands that grabbed, and voices that told her she was worthless, ungrateful, insane. She woke gasping, tangled in sheets, her heart hammering so hard it hurt. A soft knock came at the door. "Nora?" Silas's voice, low and steady. "You all right?" She sat up, wiping her face. "I'm fine." "You don't sound fine." "It was just a dream." The door opened a little wider. Silas stood in the hallway, barefoot, shirt half unbuttoned, hair mussed from sleep. "You want company, or you want me to leave you alone?" Nora pulled her knees to her chest. "Company. If you don't mind." Silas came in and sat in the chair by the window, leaving the door open, leaving space between them. "Want to talk about it?" "No." "All right." They sat in the darkness, the only sound the distant music from the saloon and the occasional creak of the boarding house settling. After a while, Nora's breathing evened out, the panic receding. "Silas." "Yeah?" "Do you ever wonder if you're doing the right thing?" "All the time." "Then how do you keep going?" Silas thought about it. "Because doing nothing feels worse." Nora nodded, understanding in a way she hadn't before. Doing nothing had been her survival strategy for so long. Stay quiet, stay small, don't make waves. But survival wasn't the same as living, and she was tired of just surviving. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I know. But I'm doing it anyway." "I know that too." She looked at him across the dark room, this man who'd found her broken in the grass and hadn't asked for anything in return. Who'd ridden 3 days to find help, who'd stood between her and Hollis without hesitation, who kept showing up even when she pushed him away. "Why?" she asked, the question she'd asked before but needed to ask again. "Why do you care what happens to me?" Silas was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with something he didn't have words for. "Because you deserve someone to care, and because if I'd been the one bleeding in that grass, I'd hope somebody would stop." Nora's throat tightened. "I don't know how to repay you." "Don't want you to." "That's not fair to you." "Life's not fair, Nora, but that doesn't mean we stop trying to make it better." She lay back down, pulling the blanket up to her chin. "Will you stay until I fall asleep?" "Yeah, I'll stay." Silas kept his word. He sat in that chair until her breathing deepened and her body relaxed into genuine sleep. Then he stood, moved the chair closer to the door where he could hear if she called out, and settled in for the rest of the night. He didn't sleep much himself. But that was all right. Sleep could wait. Morning came too quickly. Ezra was up before dawn, already dressed and armed when Silas knocked on his door. The marshal's face was grim, and Silas knew immediately that something had changed. "What happened?" Silas asked. Ezra handed him a piece of paper, a telegram, crumpled like it had been read and reread. "Came in an hour ago. Judge Holt can't make it." Silas's jaw tightened. "What do you mean he can't make it?" "His wife took sick. He's not leaving Yuma until she's stable." Ezra ran a hand through his hair. "Could be a week, could be a month. No way to know." "So what do we do?" "We wait, or we find another judge." "How long will that take?" "Too long, and there's no guarantee another judge won't be in Hollis's pocket." Silas swore under his breath. "So Hollis just sits in that cell, and his people work on getting him out. Unless we move first." "Move how?" Ezra's expression hardened. "We make enough noise that Hollis's friends can't ignore it. We talk to people, gather statements, build a case so solid that no judge, bought or not, can dismiss it. And if that doesn't work, then we get creative." Silas didn't like the sound of that, but he liked the alternative even less. "Nora needs to know." "I'll tell her, but Silas, she's not going to take this well." "I know." They found Nora in the dining room, picking at a plate of eggs she clearly had no intention of eating. When she saw their faces, she set down her fork. "What's wrong?" Ezra sat down across from her, his voice gentle but direct. "The judge is delayed. Could be a week or more before he gets here." Nora went very still. "A week. At least. And Hollis? Stays locked up, but Nora, you need to understand, a week is a long time in a town like this. Hollis has influence, and his people are going to use it. There'll be pressure on the sheriff to release him, pressure on witnesses not to talk. We're going to have to fight for every inch. Nora's hands clenched into fists on the table. He's going to get out, isn't he? Not if I can help it. But you can't promise that. No, I can't. Nora stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. I need air. She walked out onto the boarding house porch and Silas followed, giving her space but staying close. She stood at the railing, gripping the wood so hard her knuckles went white. I should have known, she said, her voice tight. I should have known it wouldn't be this easy. Nothing worth doing ever is. That's not helpful, Silas. I know. She turned to face him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. What if he wins? What if after all this he just walks away? Then we keep fighting. For how long? As long as it takes. Nora laughed, sharp and bitter. You make it sound so simple. It's not simple. It's just necessary. She wiped her eyes roughly. I'm so tired of being strong. Then don't be. Not right now. Save it for when it matters. Nora looked at him, searching his face for something. Comfort, certainty, hope. Whatever she found, it was enough. She nodded slowly and went back inside. The next 3 days were a study in waiting and watching. Ezra spent his time tracking down witnesses, people who'd known the women who disappeared, people who'd seen Hollis's temper behind closed doors. Some talked, most didn't. Fear had deep roots in Prescott, and Hollis had spent years cultivating it. Silas stayed close to Nora, accompanying her on short walks when the walls of the boarding house felt too tight, sitting with her during meals, making sure she was never alone. He saw the way people looked at her in the street, some with pity, some with suspicion, some with outright hostility. Hollis's version of events was spreading like poison through the town. Nora Pierce was unstable, they whispered. She'd stolen from a good man, run away when he tried to help her, and now she was trying to destroy his reputation. On the third day, Deputy Coulter showed up at the boarding house. Mrs. Caldwell blocked the door, arms crossed. She's not receiving visitors. This isn't a social call, ma'am. I've got questions that need answering. Then you can direct them to Marshal Kincaid. Coulter's smile was cold. The marshal doesn't have jurisdiction over local matters, and theft is a local matter. Silas appeared behind Mrs. Caldwell, his voice flat and dangerous. What theft? Coulter pulled out a piece of paper. Mr. Braddock filed a complaint. Says Miss Pierce took $500 from his safe before she ran. That's a felony. That's a lie, Nora said, stepping into view. Her face was pale, but her voice was steady. You're saying Hollis Braddock is lying? I'm saying I never took anything that wasn't mine. Coulter's eyes glittered. Funny how your word keeps coming up against his, and his has been good in this town for 20 years. Ezra materialized at Silas's shoulder, his marshal's badge catching the light. Deputy, unless you've got a warrant, you're harassing a witness in a federal case. I suggest you leave. Or what? You'll arrest me? If I have to. Coulter's jaw worked. He clearly wanted to push back, but Ezra's authority was real and visible. Finally, he folded the paper and tucked it back into his pocket. This isn't over, he said, looking at Nora. You might have these men fooled, but I know what you are. And what's that? Nora asked, her voice sharp. A liar and a thief. Silas moved before he could think, stepping between Coulter and Nora. That's enough. Or what, rancher? You going to take a swing at me? Go ahead. Give me a reason to lock you up alongside your friend. Ezra's hand landed on Silas's shoulder, a silent warning. Silas stepped back, his fists clenched, his whole body vibrating with the effort of not putting Coulter on the ground. Coulter smirked. That's what I thought. He walked away, slow and deliberate, making sure they all knew he'd leave on his own terms. Nora sagged against the doorframe. It's starting. What is? Silas asked. The part where he destroys me piece by piece. Ezra shook his head. He's trying to, but we're not going to let him. How are you going to stop him? He's planting lies, turning people against me. By the time the judge gets here, no one in this town will believe a word I say. Then we make sure the judge hears more than just this town. Nora looked at him, confused. What do you mean? Ezra's expression was calculating, strategic. Hollis's influence only goes so far. He owns Prescott, but he doesn't own the territory. There are newspaper editors in Phoenix, Tucson, Yuma, people who'd be very interested in a story about a wealthy man using the law to silence women. Silas understood immediately. You want to go public? I want to make enough noise that Hollis can't hide. Right now, this is a local scandal. We turn it into a territorial one, and suddenly all those friends of his have to decide whether protecting him is worth the scrutiny. Nora's eyes widened. You want to put my name in the papers? I want to put Hollis's name in the papers. Yours just happens to come with it. I'll be ruined. You're already ruined in this town. At least this way you'll be ruined telling the truth. Nora looked at Silas, desperate for guidance. He met her gaze, steady and honest. It's your choice, Nora. But if you ask me, I think Ezra's right. Hollis's power comes from darkness. Shine enough light on him, and he's just another man. Nora closed her eyes, breathed deep. When she opened them again, her decision was made. Do it, she said. Tell them everything. Ezra nodded. I'll send telegrams today. By evening, the first responses started coming back. A journalist from Phoenix wanted an interview. Another from Tucson requested details. Within 24 hours, the story had spread beyond Prescott's borders, and the town that had been so willing to believe Hollis's version of events suddenly found itself under scrutiny. But Hollis wasn't sitting idle. On the fourth day, the sheriff came to the boarding house. He looked uncomfortable, his hat in his hands, his eyes avoiding theirs. Marshal Kincaid, he said, we need to talk. About what? About releasing Mr. Braddock. Ezra's expression went cold. He's being held on a federal warrant. I know, but there's been pressure from the mayor, from the town council. They're saying holding him without a hearing is unlawful. He'll get his hearing when the judge arrives. That could be weeks. Then he'll wait weeks. The sheriff shifted his weight. Marshal, I'm trying to keep the peace here, but if you don't release him, or at least agree to a bail hearing, there's going to be trouble. What kind of trouble? The kind where people stop cooperating. The kind where witnesses disappear. The kind where this whole thing falls apart. Ezra stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. Sheriff, if you release Hollis Braddock, I will personally see to it that you're brought up on charges of obstruction and corruption. Do you understand me? The sheriff's face flushed. I'm just telling you what I'm hearing, and I'm telling you what will happen if you listen. The sheriff left, but Silas could see the writing on the wall. Hollis's people were circling, applying pressure from every angle. It was only a matter of time before something broke. That night, Silas found Nora on the porch again, staring at the dark street. Can't sleep? He asked. Can you? Not lately. She smiled faintly. We're a pair, aren't we? Seems like it. Nora was quiet for a moment, then said, Silas, if this doesn't work, if Hollis gets out and comes after me, I need you to promise me something. What? That you won't try to fight him alone. That you'll walk away. Silas shook his head. I can't promise that. Why not? Because I don't make promises I won't keep. Silas, Nora, listen to me. He turned to face her, his expression fierce. I'm not walking away. I'm not letting him take you, and I'm sure as hell not going to stand by while he destroys you. So don't ask me to promise something I can't do. Nora's eyes filled. I don't want you to get hurt because of me. Too late. I'm already in this. But, no buts. We're seeing this through together, or we're not seeing it through at all. Nora stared at him, and then, before she could second-guess herself, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. It was the first time she'd initiated contact, the first time she'd reached for him instead of flinching away. Silas froze for a heartbeat, then carefully, gently, put his arms around her. She was trembling, her face pressed against his chest, her hands gripping the back of his shirt like he was the only solid thing in a world that wouldn't stop spinning. I'm scared, she whispered. I know. But I'm not running anymore. Good, because I'm not either. They stood like that for a long time, holding on to each other in the darkness, drawing strength from the simple fact that neither of them was alone. When they finally pulled apart, Nora's eyes were red but clear. Whatever happens tomorrow, she said, thank you. for all of this. Don't thank me yet. We're not done. I know, but I needed to say it anyway. Silas nodded, his throat tight. Get some sleep. Tomorrow, we fight. Tomorrow we fight, Nora echoed. And when morning came, bringing with it the news that Hollis's lawyers were demanding his immediate release and that half the town was ready to riot if the federal marshal didn't back down, they were ready. Not hopeful, not confident, just ready. And sometimes that was enough. The decision came at dawn, delivered by a lawyer in a press suit who looked like he'd never worked a day outside an office. His name was Carlton Hayes, and he represented Hollis Braddock's interests with the kind of polished efficiency that money could buy. Ezra met him at the door of the boarding house, his hand resting casually on his gun belt. Mr. Hayes? Marshal Kincaid. Hayes's smile was professional, empty. I'm here to inform you that my client is prepared to post bail and will be released from custody this afternoon pending his hearing. There's no bail on a federal warrant? Actually, there is. Judge Warren in Phoenix reviewed the case and determined that Mr. Braddock poses no flight risk and should be released on his own recognizance. Hayes produced a document, signed and sealed. This is a court order. You're required to comply. Ezra took the paper, read it slowly, his jaw tightening with every line. Judge Warren's in Hollis's pocket. That's a serious accusation, Marshal. Do you have proof? I will. Until then, you'll follow the law. Mr. Braddock will be released at 2 o'clock this afternoon. I trust you'll have him ready. Hayes didn't wait for a response. He simply tipped his hat and walked away, his boots clicking against the boardwalk with the confidence of a man who knew he'd already won. Silas watched from the doorway of Nora's room, his face dark. So that's it? He just walks out? For now. Ezra crumpled the paper in his fist. But this isn't over. Tell that to Nora. Ezra looked past Silas to where Nora sat on the edge of her bed, her hands folded in her lap, her face completely blank. It was the blankness that worried Silas most. Not fear, not anger, just a terrible, hollow emptiness. Nora, Ezra said gently, stepping into the room. I know this isn't what we wanted, but he's getting out. Her voice was flat, mechanical. You're letting him out. I don't have a choice. The court order is legal. So that's it. We did all this for nothing. No, we bought you time. We got your story on record. We got witnesses talking. We made enough noise that Hollis can't just make you disappear. That matters. It won't matter if he kills me. The words hung in the air, stark and terrible. Ezra opened his mouth to argue, to reassure, but Nora cut him off. You don't know him like I do. You think because there are rules, because there's law, that he'll follow them. But he won't. He'll smile and shake hands and act like the victim, and then when nobody's looking, he'll come for me, and this time he won't let me run. Silas crouched in front of her, forcing her to meet his eyes. Then we don't let you be alone. Not for a second. You can't watch me forever. I can watch you until this is finished. And when will that be? A week? A month? A year? Nora's voice cracked. Silas, I can't live like this. Always looking over my shoulder, always waiting for him to... She stopped, pressing her hands to her face. Silas wanted to reach for her, to pull her close and promise her it would be all right. But he'd learned by now that empty promises did more harm than comfort. What do you want to do? He asked quietly. Nora lowered her hands. Her eyes were red but dry, past tears now. I want to face him. Ezra straightened. Nora, that's not... I want to face him, she repeated, stronger now. Not in a courtroom someday when a judge gets around to hearing my case. Now, today, in front of everyone. That's exactly what he wants. He'll use it to humiliate you, to make you look unstable. Let him try. Nora stood, her whole body trembling but her voice steady. I'm done hiding. I'm done being afraid. If Hollis is going to walk out of that jail, then I'm going to be standing there when he does. And I'm going to say out loud, where everyone can hear, exactly what he is. Silas rose to his feet. Ezra, she's right. This is a bad idea. Maybe, but it's her idea, and she's earned the right to make it. Ezra looked between them, weighing risks and consequences. Finally, he nodded. All right, but we do this smart. We go to the town square, we gather a crowd, and we make sure there are witnesses who aren't on Hollis's payroll. If he tries anything, we shut it down." "Agreed," Nora said. "And if this goes wrong, then it goes wrong. But at least I'll have tried." They spent the morning preparing. Ezra sent telegrams to the journalists who'd shown interest, inviting them to witness Hollis Braddock's release. Silas checked his rifle twice, made sure his revolver was loaded, and positioned himself where he'd have a clear line of sight to the jail. Nora sat in her room and wrote, her pen moving steadily across the paper, setting down every truth she'd been too afraid to speak. When she finished, she folded the pages carefully and tucked them into her pocket. If words failed her when the moment came, at least she'd have them written down. At 1:30, they walked together to the town square. Word had spread. Whether through Ezra's telegrams or Hollis's people, it didn't matter. A crowd was already gathering, drawn by the promise of spectacle. Merchants stood in doorways, women clustered on the boardwalk. Men leaned against posts with their arms crossed and their faces skeptical. Nora felt their eyes on her like brands. She kept her chin up, her shoulders back, her steps even. Silas walked on her right, Ezra on her left, a wall of protection that made her feel both safer and more exposed. Deputy Coulter stood outside the jail, his hand resting on his gun, his expression smug. When he saw them approaching, his smile widened. Well, the lady of the hour?" Nora ignored him. She found a spot in the square where she could be seen and heard, and she waited. At 2:00 exactly, the jail door opened. Hollis Braddock stepped out into the sunlight, blinking like a man emerging from darkness. He was impeccably dressed, someone had brought him fresh clothes, and his face wore an expression of wounded dignity that would have been convincing if Nora hadn't seen the calculation behind it. His eyes found hers immediately. For a moment, something cold and vicious flickered across his face. Then it was gone, replaced by concern so perfectly manufactured it made Nora's stomach turn. "Nora," he said, his voice carrying across the square. "Thank heavens you're safe. When you ran off, I was so worried. I didn't run off." Nora's voice rang out clear and hard. "I escaped." The crowd murmured. Hollis's expression shifted. Confusion, hurt, the perfect image of a man blindsided by betrayal. "Darling, you're confused. You've been through so much, and I understand." "Don't call me that." Nora took a step forward, and Silas moved with her, a shadow at her back. "Don't you dare call me darling, not after what you did." Hollis spread his hands, his tone gentle, patronizing. "Nora, please. You're making a scene. Let's go somewhere private and talk about this." "No. We're going to talk about it right here, right now, where everyone can hear." Nora pulled the folded pages from her pocket. "You want to know why I ran? I'll tell you. I ran because you locked me in a room for 3 days because I spoke to a shopkeeper you didn't approve of. I ran because you told me I was worthless, that no one would ever believe me, that I should be grateful you even looked at me. I ran because when I tried to leave, you—" Her voice broke. She forced air into her lungs, steadied herself. "You put your hands on me, you hurt me, and you smiled while you did it." The crowd went silent. Hollis's face remained calm, but his eyes had gone flat and cold. "That's a lie," he said softly. "It's the truth." "Nora, you're unwell. Everyone here knows you've been under tremendous strain." "I'm not unwell. I'm not confused. I know exactly what happened, and so do you." Hollis took a step toward her. Silas moved instantly, putting himself between them. Hollis stopped, his gaze flicking to Silas with barely concealed contempt. "Mr. Granger, I appreciate you looking after Nora, but this is a private matter between my fiancée and myself." "She's not your fiancée," Silas said flatly. "She accepted my proposal. Under duress," Ezra interjected, stepping forward, "and she's formally withdrawn it. Miss Pierce is under federal protection, Mr. Braddock. You don't get to touch her, talk to her, or go near her without her explicit consent." Hollis's smile thinned. "Marshal, I've been released from custody. I'm a free man. You have no authority to restrict my movements." "I have every authority to protect a witness." "A witness to what? Imagined slights? Hysterical accusations?" Hollis turned to the crowd, his voice rising with righteous indignation. "This woman stole from me, slandered my name, and now she's trying to destroy my reputation because I dared to offer her a better life. Is this what justice looks like in our town, where any woman can make wild claims and ruin a man without proof?" Several people in the crowd nodded. Nora felt the shift, felt the sympathy sliding toward Hollis, and something desperate and fierce rose up in her chest. "You want proof?" she said, her voice shaking. 3 women. Sarah Kinsley, Margaret Walton, Julia Chen. All engaged to you. All disappeared without a trace. Where are they, Hollis? Hollis's expression didn't change, but something in his posture went rigid. Those women chose to leave. I can't be held responsible for their decisions. 3 women. 3 properties transferred to your name right before they vanished. That's not coincidence. That's pattern. That's slander. It's public record. Ezra pulled out his own papers, documents he'd gathered from courthouses across the territory. Sarah Kinsley signed over her late father's mercantile in Tucson. Margaret Walton deeded her family's ranch in Flagstaff. Julia Chen transferred ownership of a profitable boarding house in Phoenix. All within 2 months of becoming engaged to you. All disappeared within 6 months. The crowd was listening now, uncertainty replacing certainty. Hollis's lawyer, Carlton Hayes, stepped forward. "Those are legal transactions, Marshal. Mr. Braddock has documentation proving each woman willingly transferred ownership as part of their marriage agreements." "Funny how none of them lived long enough to see those marriages through," Ezra said. Hayes's jaw tightened. "Are you accusing my client of murder?" "I'm stating facts. 3 women, 3 properties, 3 disappearances. And now Miss Pierce makes 4. Except Miss Pierce is standing right here, very much alive and making baseless accusations. Because she ran before he could finish what he started." Hollis laughed, a warm, bewildered sound that carried across the square. "This is absurd. Marshal, I understand you want to believe Miss Pierce, but you're letting her paranoia cloud your judgment. I loved those women. It broke my heart when they left. But I can't control what they chose to do with their lives." "You controlled everything else about their lives," Nora said, her voice raw. "You isolated them, broke them down, made them think they had no value without you. And when they finally believed it, you took everything they had and threw them away." "That's not true." "Isn't it?" Nora took another step forward, and this time Hollis took a step back. The crowd noticed. "You're good at making people feel small, Hollis. You're good at twisting words until they don't trust their own memories. But I remember every word, every threat, every time you made me feel like I deserved what you did to me." Hollis's mask slipped just for a second. His voice dropped, low and venomous. "You're going to regret this." "There it is," Silas said quietly. "That's the real Hollis Braddock." Hollis recovered instantly, his expression shifting back to wounded innocence. "Mr. Granger, I don't know what lies Nora has told you, but she hasn't told me lies. She's told me the truth, and I believe her." "Of course you do. She's manipulated you into thinking you're her savior. It's what she does. She finds weak men, and—" Silas's fist connected with Hollis's jaw before anyone could react. Hollis went down hard, blood spraying from his split lip, his perfect composure shattered. The crowd gasped. Coulter moved for his gun, but Ezra was faster, his revolver already drawn. "Don't," Ezra said calmly. Coulter froze, his hand hovering over his holster. Silas stood over Hollis, his knuckles bleeding, his voice deadly quiet. "You want to call me weak? Fine. But you're going to do it on your feet." Hollis pushed himself upright, wiping blood from his mouth. For the first time, his mask was completely gone. What remained was cold, calculating rage. "You just assaulted me in front of witnesses," Hollis said, his voice shaking with fury. "I'll have you arrested." "Go ahead. I'll pay the fine." "You'll pay more than that. I'll destroy you. I'll take your ranch, your reputation, everything you have." "You're welcome to try." Hollis looked around the square, at the crowd that had come to see him vindicated, and saw instead doubt, discomfort, people questioning narratives they'd accepted without thought. His lawyer was already pulling him aside, whispering urgently. Nora watched it all, her heart pounding, her hands shaking. This wasn't the victory she'd imagined. There was no dramatic confession, no moment of perfect justice. But it was something. It was cracks in Hollis's armor. It was people seeing him for what he really was. Hollis straightened, dabbing at his bloody lip with a handkerchief. When he spoke again, his voice was ice. "This isn't over, Nora. Not by a long shot." "I know," she said, "but I'm not running anymore." Hollis's eyes narrowed. Then he turned and walked away, his lawyer at his side, Deputy Coulter trailing behind. The crowd began to disperse, people talking in low, urgent voices. Ezra holstered his gun and looked at Silas. "That was stupid." "Yeah. You know he's going to press charges." "I know. And you'll probably spend a night in jail." "Worth it." Ezra shook his head, almost smiling. Probably was. Nora was staring at Silas's bleeding knuckles. "You shouldn't have done that." "Probably not. He'll use it against you. Let him." "Silas," she stopped, her voice catching. "Thank you." Silas flexed his hand, wincing. "Don't thank me. I just made things harder." "No. You made them real. For the first time, someone stood up to him and didn't back down. That matters. We'll see if it matters when the sheriff comes for me." But the sheriff didn't come that afternoon, or that evening. What came instead were visitors, people Nora had never met. People who'd known Sarah Kinsley, who'd worked for Margaret Walton, who'd rented rooms from Julia Chen. They came quietly, one at a time, and they told Ezra their stories. Small things, mostly. Observations. Concerns they'd never voiced because Hollis Braddock was a respected man, and who were they to question him? But together, those small things added up to something bigger. A pattern. A truth. By nightfall, Ezra had a dozen new statements. It still wasn't enough for murder charges. There were no bodies, no physical evidence. But it was enough to paint a picture that no amount of polish could hide. Nora sat on the boarding house porch as the sun set, watching the sky turn from gold to purple to indigo. Silas sat beside her, his bruised hand wrapped in cloth, neither of them speaking. Finally, Nora said, "What happens now?" "Now we wait for the judge, and we keep building the case. And if Hollis comes after me before then? Then we deal with it." Nora turned to look at him. "You really think we can win this?" Silas was quiet for a long moment. "I think we've already won something. You stood up to him. You told the truth in front of everyone. That took courage." "Hollis doesn't understand." "And it scared him." "Did you see his face when you wouldn't back down?" "I saw it." "That's the face of a man who's losing control, and men like Hollis can't stand that. So he'll get desperate." "Probably. And desperate men are dangerous." "Yeah, they are." Nora leaned back against the wall, exhausted. "I wish this was over." "It will be. Eventually." "And then what?" Silas looked at her, really looked at her. This woman who'd been broken and was putting herself back together piece by piece. This woman who'd run and then decided to stand. This woman who made him believe that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the refusal to let fear win. "Then you get to decide what your life looks like," he said quietly. "Without Hollis. Without fear. Just you." "That sounds impossible." "Most good things do." Nora smiled, small and tired but genuine. "You're an optimist, Silas Granger." "No, I'm just stubborn." "Same thing." They sat together as darkness fell, watching the stars emerge one by one. Somewhere in town, Hollis Braddock was planning his next move. Somewhere, Deputy Coulter was waiting for orders. Somewhere, the machinery of Hollis's power was grinding forward, looking for weaknesses to exploit. But here, on this porch, in this moment, Nora Pierce felt something she hadn't felt in years. She felt like maybe, just maybe, she was going to survive this. And survival, she was learning, was just the beginning. Inside the boarding house, Ezra Kincaid sat at a small desk, writing letters by lamplight. He wrote to Judge Holt in Yuma, pressing for a faster resolution. He wrote to the territorial governor, outlining the pattern of disappearances. He wrote to colleagues in other jurisdictions, asking them to dig into Hollis's business dealings. He was a patient man, Ezra. He understood that justice moved slowly, that cases were built brick by brick, that you couldn't rush the truth. But he also understood that sometimes you had to force the issue. Sometimes you had to make enough noise that people couldn't ignore what was right in front of them. Hollis Braddock thought he was untouchable. Ezra was going to prove him wrong. It would take time. It would take evidence. It would take witnesses willing to risk everything to tell the truth. But Ezra had all three now, and he wasn't letting go. He sealed the last letter, set down his pen, and allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. They weren't there yet, but they were close. And in the morning, they'd keep fighting. The attack came 3 nights later, just after midnight. Nora woke to the sound of breaking glass and Silas shouting her name. She rolled out of bed, her heart already hammering, and crawled toward the door. Smoke was seeping under the gap, thick and acrid, burning her throat. "Silas!" she screamed. "I'm here!" His voice came from the hallway, rough with smoke. "Stay low!" She dropped to her stomach, the floorboards hot beneath her palms. The smoke was getting thicker, darker, and she could hear the crackle of flames somewhere below. Someone had set the boarding house on fire. Silas appeared in her doorway, his shirt pressed over his nose and mouth. "We have to go, now." He grabbed her hand and pulled her up, keeping her bent low as they moved through the hallway. The heat was intense, the smoke so thick she couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. Other doors were opening, other residents stumbling out, coughing and panicked. "This way," Ezra's voice cut through the chaos. He was at the end of the hall, silhouetted against the window. "Fire escape!" They ran, Nora's lungs burning with every breath. Ezra kicked open the window and climbed out onto the iron platform, then reached back to help Nora through. Silas followed, and together they descended the ladder as flames licked out of the lower windows. By the time they reached the ground, half the town was awake. People ran with buckets, forming chains to the well, but the fire was spreading too fast. Mrs. Caldwell stood in the street in her nightgown, weeping as her life's work burned. Nora collapsed against the side of a building, coughing violently. Silas knelt beside her, his face streaked with soot. "You all right?" She nodded, unable to speak. Ezra appeared, his expression grim. "This wasn't an accident." "How do you know?" Silas asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Because I found this." Ezra held up a piece of broken glass, a rag still tied around it, reeking of kerosene. "Someone threw it through the back window." Silas's jaw clenched. "Hollis?" "Can't prove it, but yeah." Nora finally found her voice, hoarse and raw. "He tried to kill us. He tried to scare you. Killing you in a fire would raise too many questions, but if you died trying to escape. Just a tragic accident in a town full of witnesses who saw a distraught woman making wild accusations." "He's going to keep coming," Nora said, her voice flat with exhaustion. "He's never going to stop." "Then we end this," Silas said. "Tonight." Ezra shook his head. "We can't just—" "Yes, we can." Silas stood, his eyes hard. "We've been playing by the rules, waiting for judges and hearings and justice. Meanwhile, Hollis is burning down buildings with people inside. I'm done waiting." "Silas, if you go after him—" "I'm not going after him. I'm going to make him come to me." Silas looked at Nora. "But I need you to trust me." Nora met his gaze, saw the determination there, the controlled fury. "What are you going to do?" "Something Hollis won't expect, something he can't ignore. Tell me." Silas took a breath. "We're going to the town square, right now, in front of everyone, and we're going to force his hand." Ezra's eyes widened. "That's insane." "Maybe, but it'll work." "How do you know?" "Because Hollis's power comes from control. He controls the narrative, controls what people see, controls when and where things happen. We take that away from him, and he's just a man, and men make mistakes when they're cornered." Nora pushed herself to her feet, swaying slightly. "He'll have Coulter, he'll have his men, and we'll have the truth, in daylight, in front of witnesses he can't buy or threaten." Silas looked at Ezra. "You said you wanted evidence. This is how we get it. We make him show everyone who he really is." Ezra was silent for a long moment, weighing the risks. Finally, he nodded. "All right, but we do this smart. I'll spread the word, get people to the square, and I'll position men I trust where they can see everything." "How long will that take?" 2 hours? Maybe 3? Then we meet at dawn." They spent the remaining hours of darkness preparing. Ezra sent runners to the journalists who'd shown interest, to the sheriff, forcing him to choose a side. to every person who'd given a statement about Hollis's past. By the time the sun began to lighten the eastern sky, the town square was filling with people. Nora stood at the center of it all, exhausted and soot-stained, but standing. Silas was beside her, and Ezra stood just behind, his hand resting on his gun. The crowd murmured, confused and curious. Then Hollis arrived. He came with Deputy Coulter and 3 hired men, all armed. His face was composed, but Nora could see the anger simmering beneath. He wasn't used to being summoned. He wasn't used to being anything but in control. "Miss Pierce," he said, his voice carrying across the square, "I heard about the terrible fire. Thank heaven you're safe." "No thanks to you," Nora said. Hollis's expression shifted to concern. "Surely you don't think I had anything to do with that tragedy. I think you ordered it. I think you wanted me dead. And when that didn't work, you came here to finish what you started." The crowd stirred. Hollis spread his hands, the picture of wounded innocence. "Nora, your paranoia is becoming dangerous, not just to yourself, but to others. That fire could have killed innocent people." "It almost did. That was the point, wasn't it? Make it look like an accident while silencing me permanently." "This is slander. It's the truth." Nora's voice rang out clear and strong. "And everyone here knows it. They've heard the stories. They've seen the pattern. 3 women disappeared after becoming engaged to you. I was supposed to be the 4th. Those women left of their own accord. No, they didn't. You isolated them, controlled them, broke them down until they had nothing left. And then you took what little they had and discarded them." Hollis's mask was slipping now, his voice hardening. "You have no proof." "I have enough." Ezra stepped forward, pulling documents from his coat. "I have witness statements from people who knew Sarah Kinsley, Margaret Walton, and Julia Chen. I have property records showing suspicious transfers. I have testimony from townspeople who saw you with these women, who noticed when they disappeared, who were too afraid to speak up until now." "Hearsay and coincidence," Hollis's lawyer interjected, appearing from the crowd. "None of that proves wrongdoing." "Maybe not by itself," Ezra agreed. "But combined with Miss Pierce's testimony, with the pattern of behavior, with the fire last night, it paints a pretty clear picture." Hollis laughed, cold and dismissive. "You're reaching, Marshal, and everyone here knows it." "Then prove me wrong," Ezra said. "Tell us where those women are. If they left of their own accord, there should be records, letters, some trace of where they went." "I'm not responsible for tracking down women who chose to leave me." "Convenient." Hollis's eyes flashed. "I don't have to stand here and defend myself against baseless accusations from a woman who's clearly unstable and a marshal who's overstepped his authority." "Then leave," Nora said quietly. "Walk away. Go back to your life and pretend this never happened." "Gladly. But you won't, because if you walk away now, everyone will know you're guilty. They'll see you for what you are." Hollis went very still. "And what's that?" "A coward who preys on vulnerable women because it's the only way you feel powerful." The crowd fell silent. Hollis stared at Nora, and for the first time his control shattered completely. His face twisted with rage, and he took a step toward her. "You ungrateful—" Silas moved between them. "That's far enough. Get out of my way, Granger." "No!" Hollis's hand dropped to his hip, where a gun rested. The crowd gasped. Ezra's revolver cleared leather instantly, aimed at Hollis's chest. "Don't!" Ezra said calmly. Hollis froze, his hand hovering over his weapon. The square had gone deathly quiet. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. "You're making a mistake, Marshal," Hollis said, his voice shaking with barely controlled fury. "The only mistake here is yours. You thought you could control this, control her, control everything. But you can't. Not anymore." "I could have made her happy. I offered her everything." "You offered her a cage," Nora said. "You offered her a life where she'd never be free, never be herself, never be anything but what you wanted her to be. That's not love. That's possession." "You don't know what love is. Neither do you." Hollis's composure cracked further. "I gave you a home. I gave you purpose. Without me, you're nothing. I'd rather be nothing than belong to you." Something in Hollis broke then. The mask fell away completely, and what remained was raw, ugly rage. He grabbed for his gun, and three things happened simultaneously. Ezra fired a warning shot into the air. Coulter drew his weapon, aiming at Ezra, and Silas hit Hollis square in the chest, driving him backward into the dirt. The square erupted into chaos. People scattered, screaming. Coulter swung his gun toward Silas, but one of Ezra's deputies, a man named Tom Brennan, who'd been waiting in the crowd, tackled him from behind. The gun went off, the bullet burying itself in the ground. Hollis scrambled to his feet, blood streaming from his nose, and lunged at Nora. She stumbled backward, but Silas was there again, catching Hollis by the collar and slamming him down, hard. "Stay down," Silas growled. Hollis spit blood and tried to rise. Silas planted a boot on his chest. "I said stay down." Ezra had Coulter in cuffs now, and his deputies were rounding up Hollis's hired men. The journalist from Phoenix was scribbling furiously in his notebook. The crowd pressed closer, no longer afraid, hungry for the truth they'd been denied. Hollis looked up at the faces surrounding him, people he'd smiled at, done business with, controlled through fear and influence, and saw only contempt. "You're finished," Ezra said, cuffing Hollis's wrists. "Assault with intent to harm, attempted murder, conspiracy. And that's just what I can prove today. Give me a week, and I'll have enough to hang you." Hollis's face went white. "You can't." "I can, and I will." Ezra hauled him to his feet. "Hollis Braddock, you're under arrest. This time, there's no bail, no friendly judge, no walking away. This time, you answer for what you've done." As Ezra led Hollis away, the man who'd terrorized Nora for so long looked smaller somehow, diminished. Just a man in handcuffs, his power stripped away by daylight and truth. Nora stood in the center of the square, shaking, tears streaming down her face. But they weren't tears of fear anymore. They were something else. Relief, exhaustion, the overwhelming weight of knowing it was finally over. Silas was beside her instantly. "You all right?" She nodded, unable to speak. "It's done, Nora. He can't hurt you anymore." She turned to him, and the words came out broken, but real. "I thought I was going to die. When he reached for that gun, I thought, I know, but you didn't. You're here. You're safe." Nora collapsed against him, and Silas wrapped his arms around her, holding her while she shook. The crowd began to disperse, people talking in hushed, awed voices. The journalist was already heading to the telegraph office. By nightfall, the story would be spreading across the territory. By week's end, it would reach every corner of Arizona. Mrs. Caldwell appeared, wrapped in a borrowed shawl, her eyes red from crying. "Miss Pierce, I'm so sorry. If I'd known what he was—" "You couldn't have known," Nora said, straightening. "He was good at hiding it. Still, I should have seen." Mrs. Caldwell touched Nora's arm gently. "You're a brave woman, braver than most." "I didn't feel brave." "The bravest people never do." Over the next week, the truth continued to unfold. Witnesses who'd been too afraid to speak came forward. Documents were uncovered showing Hollis had paid off Deputy Coulter for years. A woman in Tucson wrote to Ezra saying she was Sarah Kinsley, alive, hiding under a different name, terrified Hollis would find her. She'd escaped in the night years ago and never looked back. Margaret Walton was found living in a convent in California, her spirit broken, but her body whole. Julia Chen had died, but not at Hollis's direct hand. She'd taken her own life 2 months after disappearing, unable to live with what he'd done to her. Her family had been too ashamed to report it, too afraid of Hollis's reach. Each revelation was another nail in Hollis's coffin. By the time Judge Holt arrived, his wife recovered, his sense of justice sharp. There was no question of innocence. The trial was swift and decisive. Hollis Braddock was sentenced to 20 years in territorial prison for fraud, coercion, assault, and conspiracy. Coulter received 5 years for corruption and obstruction. The day the verdict came down, Nora sat in the courtroom and felt nothing. Not joy, not satisfaction, just a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. Afterward, Silas found her on the courthouse steps, staring at the sky. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Empty," she said. "I thought I'd feel different. Relieved, maybe. Happy. But I just feel empty." "That'll pass." "Will it?" "Yeah, give it time." Nora turned to look at him. What happens now? Now you get to decide. No one telling you where to go, what to do, who to be, just you. That's terrifying. I know, but it's also freedom. Nora was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, I don't want to stay in Prescott. Too many memories. Where do you want to go? She looked at him, really looked at him. This man who'd found her broken and never tried to fix her, just gave her space to heal. This man who'd risked everything without asking for anything in return. I don't know yet, she said honestly, but I'd like to figure it out somewhere quiet, somewhere I can breathe. Silas nodded. My ranch is quiet. Too quiet sometimes. Could use someone around who's not afraid to speak their mind. Nora's heart squeezed. Silas, I can't. I'm not asking for that, he said gently. I'm offering you a place to land while you figure out what you want. No expectations, no pressure, just a roof over your head and time to heal. Why would you do that? Because you deserve it, and because I'd like the company. Nora felt tears prick her eyes again. What if I never feel normal again? What if I'm always like this, broken, scared, looking over my shoulder? Then you'll be broken and scared on a ranch where no one's going to judge you for it. And maybe eventually you'll be a little less broken, a little less scared. You really believe that? I really do. Nora took a shaky breath. Okay, I'll come. For a little while at least. That's all I'm asking. They left Prescott 2 days later, riding out at dawn while the town still slept. Ezra saw them off, shaking Silas's hand and giving Nora a letter. What's this? She asked. Recommendation. In case you ever want to work, testify. Start over somewhere new. It's got my seal on it. Should carry some weight. Nora clutched the letter to her chest. Thank you for everything. You did the hard part. I just made sure people were watching. The ride back to Silas's ranch was quiet and peaceful. The Arizona plains stretched endless and empty, the sky vast and clean. Nora breathed deep, feeling something loosen in her chest for the first time in years. When the ranch came into view, it looked different than she remembered. Not like a hiding place anymore. Like a home. Silas helped her down from the horse and carried her small bag to the porch. Same rules as before. Door stays open, you come and go as you please, and you're in charge of how this goes. What if I don't know how I want it to go? Then we figure it out as we go. Nora smiled, small but genuine. That sounds good. The first few weeks were hard. Nora had nightmares that left her gasping and shaking. She flinched at sudden movements, startled at loud noises, spent hours staring at the horizon like she was waiting for Hollis to appear. Silas gave her space but stayed close, a steady presence that asked nothing and offered everything. Slowly, incrementally, Nora began to heal. She started helping with small tasks around the ranch, feeding chickens, mending fences, cooking meals. The work was simple, physical, grounding. It gave her something to focus on besides the fear. One evening, 3 months after the trial, Nora was sitting on the porch watching the sunset when Silas joined her. You've been quiet today, he said. I've been thinking. About what? About staying. Silas went still. Staying here? Yeah, if you'll have me. Not like before, just as someone who lives here, someone who helps, someone who's trying to build a life that's her own. Silas was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Nora, you can stay as long as you want, however you want, no conditions. I want to contribute, to work, to be part of this, not just someone you're helping out of pity. It's never been pity. Then what? Silas looked at her, his expression open and honest. Respect. You survived something that would have broken most people. You fought back when it would have been easier to give up. That's not something to pity. That's something to admire. Nora felt her throat tighten. I don't feel admirable. You don't have to. Doesn't make it less true. She looked out at the darkening sky, at the land that was slowly becoming familiar. I think I could be happy here. Eventually. Then stay, however long it takes. What if it takes years? Then it takes years. What if I never... She stopped, swallowed. What if I can't ever be what you might want me to be? Silas reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he took her hand gently. Nora, I don't want you to be anything but yourself. Whoever that is, whatever that looks like. That's enough. Nora looked down at their joined hands, feeling the warmth of his touch, the steadiness. It didn't scare her anymore. It felt safe. Okay, she whispered, I'll stay. And she did. The months turned into a year, and the year turned into 2. Nora learned the rhythms of the ranch, the seasons, the work that never quite ended but was satisfying in its constancy. She learned to sleep through the night without nightmares. She learned to meet strangers without flinching. She learned that healing wasn't linear, that some days were harder than others, but that progress was still progress even when it was slow. She also learned that trust could be rebuilt, that not all men were like Hollis, that kindness without expectation was real and possible and worth accepting. Silas never pushed, never demanded. He just kept showing up day after day, proving through action that he meant what he said. And slowly, carefully, Nora let herself believe him. 2 years and 3 months after the trial, Nora was working in the garden when Silas came out of the barn. She looked up, shading her eyes against the sun, and smiled. It was an easy smile, unconscious and genuine, the kind of smile she'd thought she'd lost forever. Silas smiled back. Need help? Always. He knelt beside her in the dirt, and they worked together in comfortable silence. At some point, Nora's hand brushed his, and she didn't pull away. At some point, he moved closer, and she let him. And when the sun set that evening, and they sat together on the porch, like they had 100 times before, Nora reached for Silas's hand first. He took it gently, lacing his fingers through hers. I'm glad you stayed, he said quietly. Me too. You happy? Nora thought about it, really thought about it. She thought about the fear that still lived in her bones sometimes, about the scars that would never fully fade, about the parts of herself she'd lost and would never get back. But she also thought about the peace she'd found in this place, the strength she'd discovered in herself, the life she was building one day at a time. Yeah, she said finally. I think I am. Silas squeezed her hand. Good. You deserve to be. And for the first time in her life, Nora believed him. The ranch that had started as a refuge became a home. The man who'd saved her became a partner. The woman who'd been broken became whole, not unchanged, not unmarked, but whole in a way that honored everything she'd survived. And on quiet evenings when the sun set over the Arizona plains and the world felt vast and full of possibility, Nora Pierce would sit on that porch and know with absolute certainty that she was free. Not because Hollis was in prison, not because the trial was over, not because justice had been served, but because she had chosen herself. She had chosen to fight, to speak, to stand. She had chosen to survive and then to live. And that choice, that hard-won, terrifying, beautiful choice, was hers alone, forever.